focusing too much on the artificial satellite. Mercury and Venus are the closest planets to the Sun, have no natural satellites. So not Mercury, if you be asked that, mention the satellites which don't have natural satellites. Mention the planets that don't have the natural satellites, then we say that it's Mercury and what? And Venus have no any natural satellites. Okay, have no any natural satellites. So they have no. They don't have any natural satellites, basically. Right? Mercury, Sedoti, and Venus. So again, just in addition to this, the moon orbits the Earth, right? The Earth in a close and stable orbit, okay? And complete one revolutions in 27.3 days. Very important, because in some of the problems you might find that the moon is mentioned. So the period for the periods of revolutions of the moon should be in your mind. 27.3 days. 27.30 days. That's the time when the moon, or the times that takes by the moon to complete one revolutions revolving around the Earth in close and stable orbit. Okay, good. So now let us go in having a too much detail on the subject of artificial satellites. So then now, if that's the case, let me take you to the important and crucial subtopics of satellites, which we call the artificial satellites. Say it with me, artificial satellites. Say artificial satellites. Because this is the physics, we are interested in the science of the artificial, where human beings we can have. So you have artificial. I would like to teach you about the second type, which we call the artificial. Say with me, artificial satellites. Artificial satellites. So the question is, what is a artificial? What is an artificial satellite? So this is the question that we have on the spot. What is artificial satellite? So I have found 3 definitions of artificial satellites according to its necessity. So we say that in the context of space flight, in the context of space flight, the satellite is an object that has been intentionally placed into the orbit. Placed that is has been intentionally placed into the orbit. That's one of the into the orbit, but that's not enough to orbit the planet. To orbit the planet. That's the definition. Or may define that artificial satellite is a type of satellite which is man-made, man-made, that's orbits. That orbits around us, and orbits around the S. Orbits around the S or other planet in a stable and a close orbit. Also, some references define that this artificial satellite is a type of satellite yes, no, those two are enough. Those two definitions are enough. So let me explain these definitions so for you to understand the concepts of artificial satellites before I surprise you. We say that in the context of the space flight, this is the subject of that studies a lot about the space, sending the machines into the space. In the context of the space flight, a satellite is an object, this is according to Wikipedia, is an object that has been intentionally placed into the orbit orbit the planet, right? So a satellite, an artificial satellite, we say that this is an object that has been intentionally placed into the orbit. Suppose that this the S, or this the planet, the other planets. We take these artificial satellites, we place into the orbit, and then the main purpose is just to orbit the planet, right? Such as S, such as Mars. It depends on which planets that you are placing the artificial satellite into the orbit to orbit the planet. Or some of the references, especially the advanced physics books, define artificial satellite is a type of satellite which is man-made. So this is man-made satellite, is a type of man-made satellite that orbits. So this orbits around the Earth or other planets, where in a close in a stable and closed orbit. So what does it mean? For instance, let's suppose that this is the S, right? So, okay, let us take the elliptical structure of the S. Suppose that this is the S, right? So this is the S. So again, we have a satellite that's revolving the S in this orbit, but nearby and close to the S's surface. So just like this. So this is the way that it orbits, and this is the way that it orbits. So this we call it close and stable orbit. So suppose that this is your machine. This is your machine. So here we have the satellite. Okay, but if you watch the three-dimensional, then you'll find that it's very interesting. This is the S's surface, or the S's planet. S's surface like that. So that's what we say that or we define the artificial satellite. This is man-made. Artificial satellites, all the artificial satellites are man-made satellites. So even yourself as a student, as a physicist, remember that those people who used to make these artificial satellites, they studied basic physics, advanced physics, higher level physics, and even that applications, or we call it astronomical physics science. So don't worry, one day you might be astronomer of United Republic of Tanzania. One day you might be the physicists or the specialists who will design the artificial satellite for United Republic of Tanzania. So don't dishonor yourself. Honor yourself that you can make it, okay? It's because this is the way that you are building the concept. So these are the man-made. So we need a person who make the artificial satellite for United Republic of Tanzania. If you have airplanes, so why should we not design our artificial satellites just to revolve around our beautiful and fantastic country? That a challenge I'm giving you who is watching this video right now. It's possible. Okay, so that's all about the definitions of artificial satellites. I believe that now you have understood the subject. We have many examples of artificial satellites. According to the NASA document that they say, up to this time, up to this day, meaning that 2021, they say that they have 40 countries in the world have already launched the artificial satellites of almost more than 8,000 artificial satellites. Some of them, they have expired. The times for revolving their orbits has been expired. Some of them, they fail maybe to continue with the desired task. Some of them, they are still there, giving us information, helping us in navigations and so forth. So the subject of satellites is interesting actually. Don't ignore it for the rest of your life. That's the opportunity. Because if you go in some other field, you find there's a high competition, so you cannot get the comfortable environment. So create yourself, create your own environment, okay? So, we say that we have types of artificial satellites. That's the next concept right now that I want to break it down. We have 8 types of artificial satellites. These types of artificial satellites, we classify them according to the application. Okay? Types of artificial satellites and application, right? And the applications. So there are 8 types of artificial satellites according to their applications. How many satellites are there? Artificial satellites, 8. According to their applications. We classify them according to the area of applications, or where we apply them effectively however that they can give us some backup information. I'd like to mention them, okay, to you, so the new physics students understand them. The first type, we have communication satellites. Say communication satellites. So we have communication satellites at the first type. Also we have satellites, artificial satellites. So we say the navigation satellites for navigation purposes. This is for communication, for telecommunication. If you're expecting to be a telecommunication engineer, if you're expecting to be electronics engineer, if you expect to be a computer engineer, if you're expecting to be electrical engineer, if you're expecting to be a biomedical engineer, if you're expecting to be computer scientist, right? So make sure that you understand this subject of the satellites, because it will be one of your undergraduate or one of your diploma studies, especially for undergraduate level. So it means that you take serious this material, don't throw them there. I'm telling you because, you know, I pursued that electronics and telecommunications. So we had a modules in NTA level 8, we call it satellites, and we call it satellites and radar. The module is called radar, okay, and then the module is called the satellites, and there's a module called, we call it navigation. So can you imagine if you study a module called navigation? So you study even navigation satellites, right? So communications, maybe telecommunication, communication engineering, you want to be a communication, there's no way out that you can finish undergraduate level without learning communication satellites, right? And then the parking orbits and whatever, there's a lot of calculations, and even the issue of the loss in the space, okay? The issue of maybe the issue of power, you have to take considerations about that, because the power there is the sunlight and even sometimes some of the lithium batteries and so forth. So we have navigation satellite. The third type of these satellites, we have drone. I think that you heard the word drone. So there are satellites for tracking or giving information to the drone, right? Drone satellites. And then the fourth type of these satellites, we have geostationary satellites. But first of all, we have ground satellites. Ground satellites. When you say communication satellite, for example, you hear that the TBC is broadcasting so maybe the RFA, Radio Free of Africa, we are broadcasting our news by using the satellites. So all of them, they are talking about communication satellites, right? So bear that in your mind. Don't be ignorant once again while you have attended this session. Okay, the fifth types, so you have ground satellites. We have also remote sensing. Very important for electronics engineers and electrical engineers. Remote sensing. Sensing what is satellites. This is to collect the we call them the sensors info or the sensor data, right? We can place sensors in different places of the space and then access the information. These sensors, they might be sending the information to the satellites, and then the satellites is giving us the output of the sensors. So that the means of remote sensing satellite, right? Very interesting, very important for engineers. Okay, so number 6, we have number 6, we call it global. Say global. Global. You like to be global? Global. Positioning. Global positioning system. Global positioning system. In abbreviations, we call it GPS satellites. So there's the satellites for the GPS, GPS system, whether in your mobile phones or you're using GPS in your computer, on your iPad. Bear in your mind that how the communications, how do you know the latitude, the longitudes of the place where you are, the altitudes, is by using the satellite. Interesting, right? So you have to think about the satellites and have a great imagination that what if we have our own satellites, right? So then another one, we call it geostationary satellites. Geostationary satellites. So these geostationary satellites, in abbreviations, we call it Geos, we have all here. Geosatellite. Then the A type of artificial satellite, we have again something called geocentric orbit type. Geocentric orbit type. Geocentric orbit type. That to say that we have Leo, we have Geo, okay, we have Geo, we have Hale. All of them are geocentric satellites. Okay? So right now we have too much information concerning about the types of artificial satellites. First one, I said communication satellites for communication. The worldwide communication, for example, that you are using the internet, right? But maybe sometimes that for the internet you are accessing a router, maybe you're accessing a server computer that is in Russia, while you are in United Republic of Tanzania. You don't think even how long, because within 1 second you get the information. So how does transmissions miracles is going on? One of the effective ways we're using the satellites communication. Okay, so there's a communication satellites for providing the internet and so. So then we have navigation satellites for navigation's purpose. For example, that ship navigations, boat navigations, you see, airplane navigation. Some of the airplanes are using the satellites navigations. It's a little bit expensive, but yes, you know, that's very important for you to have a right flight. Drone satellites, that for the drones, you know, drones, these are small airplanes that are used, especially the mean imaging in the 21st centuries for scientific research about engineering research. Also, you have ground satellites, you have remote sensing satellites, you have global positioning system satellites, and you have geostationary satellites, we have geocentric orbit type satellites, right? So those are the 8 types of satellites. So then now let's take you to another important subject, or another important concept we call the principle of launching the S satellite. So I would like to take you now to the principle of launching principle of launching the S satellite. The S artificial, or even if we don't mention the word artificial, now you have in your mind that it's artificial satellite. So now I want to teach you that the basic principle, in case that astronomers want to launch a satellite which will revolve around the Earth, right? So before I even explain the principle, you say that the S artificial, the S so you say the S artificial satellites artificial satellites are the satellites, and the satellites revolve or orbit the Earth. These are the satellites orbit the Earth. These are the what? Are the satellites orbit the Earth. Okay? Are the satellites revolves or orbits the S. The S in a close and is stable in a close and stable path or stable orbit. So there is a principle of launching the satellites. We don't place satellites in their particular orbits the way by using any technique. There's a principle. So we say number one, it is possible. The satellites, the artificial satellites, it's just me who is insisting the word artificial in your mind, but sometimes they just call it satellites because they know that in your mind you know that this concept is describing the artificial satellites. So the artificial satellites can be launched from the Earth's surface, from the Earth's surface, to cycle the Earth, in the stable orbit, at the second sentence that I want to make. So the question now is, how is a satellite launched? How is a satellite launched? Launched in the close or in the stable or in the orbit, in its orbit. How is a satellite launched in its orbit? Well, so you say that this is the answer to that question. A satellite, especially an artificial satellite, is taken by what? By a rocket in larger laters to a suitable height. This is very important keyword again. A suitable height above the Earth's surface, above the surface of the Earth, above the Earth's surface, above the Earth's surface, and then above Earth's surface. So let us put there. Then, so I said that then this satellite is given a suitable initial horizontal and it is given a suitable initial horizontal velocity given suitable initial horizontal velocity. So as to put it in a circular path, put it in its orbit, or in some of the reference it is circular path, okay, in its orbit, circular path to orbit, orbits the S, orbits the S. So let me explain the concepts of the principle of launching. So we said that we are learning principle of launching. The S is artificial satellites. The S is artificial satellites are the satellites revolves or orbits the S in a closed and stable orbit. The artificial satellites can be launched from the S's surface to circle the S in the stable orbit. The questions now on the stage. How is a satellite launched in its orbit? How do we launch? How do astronomers launch the communication satellites in its orbit? How do astronomers launch the navigation satellites into its particular orbit? Right? How does NASA launch a particular satellite maybe to orbit the S? So the answer is, it's not a simple process, but we just introduced to you because this is an introduction of the concept of the satellites. It's not too much details. So the basic thing we have to bear in mind is two things is going to be done, but in advanced level there's a lot of things to be done. So you say that after designing and testing the particular satellites on the Earth's surface, then the satellite is taken by a rocket. So one of the functions of the rocket that I told you in rocket propulsion are the part of the Newton's law or Newton's mechanics, we call it classical mechanics, Newtonian classical mechanics, is to take the satellites to a suitable height, not to any height, to a suitable, desired, measured height above the Earth's surface. This height will be measured from the Earth's surface to the point where we want to launch it. And we'll see in the derivation soon, because we've got deriving the formulas of this velocity and whatever and so forth, and doing a lot of stuff. And I really enjoy the physics, because my main objective to let you enjoy the beauty of of physics. That's all about this channel. Okay, so then the second thing, it is given this after the rocket reaches this suitable height with a satellite. Remember that it means that the rocket is carrying a satellite to the particular orbit, and then the second task, this rocket is responsible to give a satellite a suitable initial horizontal velocity, right? It's not speed, because this is directional, it's a vector quantity, so as to put it in its orbit. So each satellite revolves around the Earth, it has its own orbit, right? Puts it in its own orbit, or in circular path, to orbit the Earth's surface. So that's what's happening in simple language. But if you go, you may learn almost 10 lectures on how the launching of the satellites is done practically, right? But stay tuned, follow along about this subject, you learn about. Okay, so that's the principle, or that's the principle of launching the satellite. So then the next question, how do we call this initial horizontal velocity, right? So the initial, so you say that the initial, so this is the sentence that I want to make. The initial horizontal velocity The initial horizontal velocity, right? The initial horizontal velocity is called in this subject of planetary motion is called the orbital velocity.